Hello, and welcome to this next video in our Genesis series. I'm sorry that it's been a while, but I have been doing research, and I didn't want to do this video until I had acquired some new information, which is now available through Dr. Nathaniel Jensen's book, Traced, which you see here. And I've been reading it and trying to study it and ascertain his findings as compared to some of our previous understandings about this chapter in Genesis. And it has unlocked a lot of amazing possibilities and facts and truths that were previously unknown. And so when I've taught this chapter in the past, Genesis chapter 10, I was relying on strictly historians and in some cases tradition, and also the teachings of others. And now with this amazing research that has been brought forth, we can also now overlay the DNA of hundreds upon hundreds of individuals from all these different people groups that it talks about in Genesis chapter 10 of the table, what's called commonly the Table of Nations. And so this is really fascinating, and this particular chapter has always been a favorite of mine, and I had a bunch of assumptions about it, which again, this book has just kind of blown the lid off of a whole bunch of the assumptions of many Bible scholar and teacher. So I have not been able to read the entire book yet, but I've read significant portions of it, and the ending, which is the appendix, which gets into all the technical details. And I'm here to say I'm definitely not an expert in genetics or a geneticist by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, that would probably be my one of my big weaknesses is biology, and especially modern biology with all the genetic information. And so what I am, of course, is a Bible teacher, and I do appreciate a lot of science and a lot of background that confirms and corroborates the biblical record, and as inerrant, of course, as we know it to be by God's inspiration. And so when we see these things, it really just confirms and confirms and confirms the biblical account, which makes those of us who are strict believers in the inerrant Word of God and the divine inspiration behind every word and every name and everything that goes into it. And so I would highly recommend this book. It's fascinating, and he does, I believe, he does have some theories, so it's not like every single thing that he says is a 100% for sure guaranteed fact. But I believe his suppositions and the inferences that he makes from the data that he's collected and analyzed, I believe them to be more accurate than some of the other ones that I've seen. And I'm going to show you some of those today and do a little bit of comparison. I just kind of felt really pressured and pressed by the Lord to go ahead and continue this video. We've taken about 3 weeks off from this Genesis series, and I did that while I was trying to do all this research, because I was ready to jump into Genesis 10 based on my former teachings on it and my former understandings on it. But now with this, I feel like I have to make some modifications, and I'm just pressed to reconsider many of my former assumptions. And so as I started doing that, I realized if I tried to gain even a modicum of expertise in this is going to take months, and I didn't want to put this series on hold for months. while I tried to become more competent in my understandings. So what I thought I would do is just kind of have an introductory session and video on Genesis chapter 10 and bring in some of the concepts that he has put forth here, Dr. Jensen has put forth in his book, and compare those to some of the former assumptions. And again, I would direct you to his book and also his YouTube channel and the Answers in Genesis YouTube channel with the creation research that they do there, and they have a ton of great material about that kind of thing, and all those types of subjects, creation and the young Earth creationism, which I'm a strong proponent of course. And I would just direct you there for the technical details and their expertise. Again, I'm not claiming to be any sort of expert in this particular field. Other areas of science I have studied pretty extensively, but this one would definitely be my weakness. So I do think I have enough now to at least pique your interest and share some hopefully amazing, inspiring, edifying, and even mind-blowing things that we can derive from some of these things. And I feel like the Lord's also giving me some things to unlock about this from a Bible teaching perspective, not simply the scientific aspect of it. So with that as a long introduction, I thank you for bearing with me, and I thank you for waiting. Those of you who've been following this series and wondering where the next video is going to come out, finally here it is. And so I hope you enjoy it, and I hope it blesses you. And what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to break this chapter into maybe 4 sessions. This one today is an introduction, and then we'll separate out maybe Shem, Ham, and Japheth as one session each for them, and kind of go over a little bit about each of the 3 sons of Noah and some of the different aspects that the scripture brings out regarding those 3 sons and their descendants from that point. And so we'll see. I don't know if I'm going to go that in depth with it yet or not. I just want to kind of get this introductory one out of the way, and we'll see where the Lord leads us after that. So with all that said, let's as usual jump in and take a look at the actual text itself. And so if you will just join me in this first, let's just read it. And so I'm going to go here to Genesis 10 first, and let's just read the chapter. During my memorization days, I usually like to use the authorized version, but of course for technical scientific stuff in the Bible, I do still prefer in many cases the New American Standard. I wish Blue Letter Bible had the 1977 version, but they don't. They only have the 95 version, which is worse, and the 2020 version is even worse than that. So don't let anybody tell you the latest versions of the New American Standard are better. Actually, the 1977 version is probably the best one that they put out. But we'll use what we got from the New American Standard, and this is the translation that I memorized this in way back when. So with that said, let's just jump in. So it says, "Now these are the records of the generations of Shem and Ham and Japheth, the sons of Noah, and sons were born to them after the flood. The sons of Japheth were Gomer and Magog and Madai and Javan and Tubal and Meshech and Tiras. And the sons of Gomer, Ashkenaz, Riphath, and Togarmah. And the sons of Javan were Elishish, Tarshish, Kittim, and Dodanim. And from these the coastlines of the nations were separated into their lands, everyone according to his language, according to their families, into their nations. And the sons of Ham, Cush, and Mitzrayim, Put, and Canaan. The sons of Cush, Seba, and Havilah, Sabta, and Ramah, and Sabteka. And the sons of Ramah, Sheba, and Dedan. Now Cush begot Nimrod, and he became a mighty one on the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord, therefore it is said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. The beginning of his kingdom was Babel, and Erech, and Akkad, and Calneh, in the land of Shinar. From that land he went forth into Assyria, and built Nineveh, and Rehoboth-ir, and Calah, and Rezin between Nineveh and Calah, that is the great city. And Mitzrayim begot Ludhim, and Anahim, and Lahabim, and Naphtuhim, and Pathrusim, and Caslusim, from which came the Philistines and Caphtorim. Canaan begot Sidon his firstborn, and Heth, and the Jebusite, and the Amorite, and the Girgashite, and the Hivite, and the Arkite, and the Sinite, and the Arvadite, and the Zemarite, and the Hamathite. And afterward the families of the Canaanite were spread abroad. The territory of the Canaanite was from Sidon as you go toward Gerar, as far as Gaza as you go toward Sodom and Gomorrah, and Admah and Zeboim as far as Lasha. These are the sons of Ham, according to their families, according to their languages, by their lands, by their nations. And also to Shem, the father of all the children of Eber, the brother of Japheth the elder, children were born. The sons of Shem were Elam, and Asher, and Arpachshad, and Lud, and Aram. And the sons of Aram, Uz, and Hol, and Gether, and Mash. And Arpachshad begot Shelah, and Shelah begot Eber. And 2 sons were born to Eber. The name of the first one was Peleg, for in his days the earth was divided, and his brother's name was Joktan. Joktan begot Almodad, and Shalef, and Hazarmaveth, and Gerar, and Hadoram, and Uzal, and Diklah, and Obal, and Abimael, and Shebna, and Ophir, and Havilah, and Jobab. All these were the sons of Joktan. Now, their dwelling was from Mesha as you go toward Sephar, the hill country of the east. These are the sons of Shem, according to their families, according to their languages, by their lands, according to their nations. These are the families of the sons of Noah, according to their genealogies, by their nations. And out of these the nations were separated on the earth after the flood. So, if you count them all up, and this is significant because I'm going to take you through some scientific analysis of this, where people make some incorrect assumptions because they're thinking in science mode, and they're not thinking in scriptural inerrancy mode. But nevertheless, if you count them all up from the sons of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, you will get 70 names. So these are known as the 70 nations. It's the 70 nations of the Gentiles. And out of these 70 emerges one. There's one nation that emerges out of these 70 from one of the lines here, which we'll talk about shortly. And that nation becomes Israel. And this is the nation that God establishes as, if in a manner of speaking, the high priest nation. The nation that is going to be the priestly nation that God works through to minister to and covenant with all the other nations, all the other 70. Now, if you go into Numbers and Leviticus chapter 23 and other places, also you'll see in Exodus chapter 1 and several other places. I'm not going to take you there right now, but you can go look it up in Exodus chapter 1. You can look at it in Numbers. You can look at it in Leviticus 23. And there's several places where this concept of 70 is consistent throughout the scriptures. And so the 70 nations, you may recall in Luke at that one point, initially Jesus sends out the 12, but later on he sends out the 70. And so that's not just some random number. There happened to be 70 of these secondary apostles. There was the 12, but then there was these 70 that got sent out. So it wasn't just that it happened to be 70. No, 70 is a very prophetic number in Scripture, speaking to the 70 nations that are established here in Genesis 10. So some of these science-thinking people think, oh, well, the DNA research we're doing, we don't know. Some of these lines may have gone extinct. No, they didn't go extinct. There are 70, and because there's 70, there's going to be 70 that make it all the way to Revelation. Because God established this in Genesis, not just as a historical narrative, but as a prophetic destiny. And that's where those kind of strictly science-thinking people mess up, and that's where I come in to correct as a Bible teacher, saying, no, none of these lines have gone extinct. When God, the gifts of God are without repentance. And so when He blesses somebody to be a nation in the world, and this particular nation in the world is going to be one of the nations that has the salvation of Jesus Christ available to it, then that people group is not going to go extinct. God is going to see them through, and those of that people group who are going to receive Christ become part of the church and enter into the kingdom of God. And this is the kingdom that he ultimately is focused on, not any one specific one of these nations. Now, with that said, I have tried to learn as much as I can about, in the last few weeks, about the genetic makeup of human DNA, particularly, and this is one of the things that is expressed in the book, where it is the Y-chromosome, the male chromosome. It's only carried by males, so if you are a female, you actually don't have it. And so if you wanted to find out what your Y-chromosome ancestry is, in other words, your specifically paternal, fatherly line, you would have to have a male relative, for instance, a brother or an uncle from your father's side, or your father or grandfather. You would have to have one of them actually do a DNA test if you're female, in order to find out what your father's paternal descendancy is. Now, when this group has gotten together, when all of this DNA research started last century, in the 20th century, and now of course it carries on with much greater precision into this century, the 21st century, and now they labeled many of these genes within the human genome, and the name that is typically used is called a haplogroup. So the haplogroup is which Y chromosome descendancy you are from. In other words, which father you are descended from. Now, you can use this, and some people, starting back in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, they started doing this and making assumptions based on history and historical records, and trying to mix it together with the scientific aspect that they were seeing, and came to some conclusions. Now, whether those conclusions are correct or not remains to be seen, and further research is being done as we speak. But I think what this book, Traced, has done is it has brought forth an interesting correction to some of the assumptions that many others have made. And so let me just switch over here and share that with you briefly here. Okay, so I did find this article. I found this particular article very interesting, and this is from Leif A. Bostrom from Sweden. And if you'll notice this, it says the people groups can be described using language, haplogroups, or genealogical relationship according to Genesis chapter 10. And I would also say the one that he leaves out here is geography. And that's a big part of Trace. That's one of the most impressive parts of this book, is the geography aspect, because Dr. Jensen does a tremendous job of mapping out the migrations geographically of the different people groups. And this is what's fascinating, because if you're like me and you've studied this before, this book came out just a few years ago. I think it came out maybe 2 years ago or so. 2022, I think, is correct. And so when this book first came out just a few years ago, it kind of blew the lid off of this, because if you were like me and many others, you just assumed, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So Shem, this is where we get the word Semitic from, which is funny because everybody uses it to say, if you're anti-Semitic, you're against Jews. Well, actually, Semitic means a whole host of people. It's really Middle Eastern people, many of the Asian peoples, and including the Jews, and also other Middle Eastern groups. And so when you really say anti-Semitic, it's kind of a misnomer, because it means you're talking about everybody from Iranians, who are very quote-unquote anti-Semitic, but Semitic comes from Shem, Shemitic, and so it's kind of just a misnomer, because if you're supposedly some anti-Semite, then that means you would be against all Semitic people, including the people from Persia and Syria and a whole host of others. But that's neither here nor there. That's a different argument. So, but nevertheless, the Shemites or Semites, this people group you would just assume is, oh, this is Middle Easterners. This is like Israel and the surrounding nations in the Middle East, like Iraq and Iran, Persia and Assyria, and Syria and Aram, which is Syria, and all those other nations right around that area. And then you would think, oh, Ham. Well, Ham is the African tribes, and this would be like Cush and Mitzrayim, who's Egypt, and these others. And so this would be that particular descendancy. And then Japheth would be the Caucasians, like Indo-Europeans, and this would be like, for example, the Russians and the Germans and the French and English and whoever else, right? Spanish, etc. And so when you think like that, and that's kind of the way everybody's always thought about it, you think, okay, well, I look at my genealogical history, whatever I know of it, and I know I have some ancestry, from, for instance, England and Germany and that kind of stuff. So you think, oh, well, I must be from Japheth. Wow. Does this book blow the lid off of that? And if you're African descent, you're thinking, oh, well, I must be from Ham. Well, not necessarily. And this book just kind of really blows the lid off of those assumptions. And other things, you'd think, oh, well, I'm from this particular people group, so I must be from Shem. Not necessarily. You'd be flabbergasted at what the actual results show. And so if you do a DNA test, which I don't necessarily recommend because you never know who's getting access to that data and what they might intend to do with it, with all the crazy things that are going on in the world. But nevertheless, if you do one of those generic ones like Ancestry.com or 23andMe and all those, you have to make sure you call them and make sure that you do a very specific DNA test for the Y-chromosome isolation, that they will isolate the Y-chromosome and give you the Y-chromosome results, not the mitochondrial generic DNA, because that just shows you in general from your mother's side, and more a general ancestry, and it doesn't show the father's side, and so necessarily. So you really have to schedule an actual Y chromosome test, and you have to make sure that they will give you the Y chromosome test with your haplogroup for the results to mean anything to you regarding this book. So if you want to know your paternal descendancy, and I have not done a DNA test personally myself, however, I do have family history, and my last name is actually an adopted last name because 3 generations ago my great-grandfather died in the Spanish influenza, and my great-grandmother remarried, and that's the name that my grandfather took instead of his blood name. And so my blood descendancy is actually different from my last name. So one example of many of the things that gets brought up in this book. And so, for example, my blood descendancy goes by a different last name. And so I looked up the genealogical database of the people in that last name who happened to come for sure. And I've traced my ancestry back to roughly the 1500s AD, and actually got a little bit further back than that, but it definitely goes back to Yorkshire, England. And that is where my descendancy goes back to. So you would think, oh, that's Japheth. However, I researched that specific last name, and several people who share that last name have a descendancy from the Y-Chromosome that is actually not Japheth at all. It's actually from Shem. So, without 100% confirmation, but a high degree of confidence from the research that I've done so far, my paternal line actually is very much Semitic, very much from Shem, not from Japheth, from a paternal perspective. Now, on my maternal side, definitely from Japheth. And so that's one of the interesting things that this work unlocks, is that you may have a particular concept of what you think your descendancy is, but when you actually do the DNA research, if you're willing to do it, not everybody is, like for instance I'm not, but I do know the history of my family, and so I also am able to go look up people in that family lineage who have done their DNA, and what their results are. And it is, according to Jeanson here, it is from Shem, not from Japheth, from a paternal perspective. And so I think it's pretty cool to go link back and find your ancestry and say, like, you can actually look at people in the Bible and you can say, I am 99.9% sure that I'm descended from this specific lineage that it talks about in Genesis chapter 10, and in some cases even in other chapters of the Bible take it further. And so there's a high degree of probability even that the lineage that I was looking at, just for me personally, just as a matter of interest, there's a high degree of possibility that from my paternal side, this part that we read here from Shem, where it says, 2 sons were born to Eber. The name of the one was Peleg, for in his days the earth was divided, and his brother's name was Joktan. Okay, now from here, this is where the Jews come from Peleg. Okay, so they're from Shem, through Arpachshad, and then through Eber. So that name Eber, that's where you get the word Hebrew from. So Eber, that equates to the Hebrews. Eber, Hebrews. That's where the name comes from. And so when you have these 2 sons born to Eber from the Hebrews, but only one of this group actually becomes the Israelites, and that group is the one that becomes ultimately known more commonly as the Jews. And so, but there's a pretty high degree of probability that my descendancy is actually from Joktan, and Joktan is the one that has these 13 sons. Joktan begot Almadad and Shalef and Hazarmaveth and Jerah and Hadoram and Uzal and Dikla, Obal, Bemial, Sheba, Ophir, Havilah, and Jobab. Interesting point. There's somebody who wrote a book on this that I know from 25 years ago or so. He did a study on this and wrote this. There's actually 2 places in Scripture, this is one of them, where people theorize on who Job was. This is one of the theories. So some people believe that this right here, Jobab, is actually the man that is Job in the Bible, in the book of Job. There's another place where there's another theory that he's not Jobab, that there's another Job elsewhere, and they think that that's the Job of the Bible in the book of Job. And so, but it's interesting that there's a pretty high degree of likelihood that my paternal descendancy actually comes from Joktan and one of these 13 sons that he has. And that just is kind of mind-blowing when you think about it. Of course, further research needs to be done, but at this point, that is a very strong possibility on the research that I've done. And so that really, to me, kind of makes the Bible just come alive and makes all this stuff really fascinating. And so I am excited to learn more in the future as more research comes out. But let me just show some of these things. Okay, so one issue is if you look at all the haplogroups, and I'm going to show you those from the book in just a moment. People were expecting to find 70 of them. They were expecting to find 70 haplogroups because, oh, there's 70 nations, so there should be 70 haplogroups. And out of all the people who've submitted to this DNA testing research to publicize it, they've only found, and this is a big debate right now, and I'm not an expert by any means, but I'm just going to say roughly, they've roughly found about 20-ish. Okay, we'll say 20-ish. But really, when you look at it, many of those are just sub-branches. And so really, if you really look at it, and that's kind of what I've been studying, is really looking at it, they've actually really found, if you get rid of the sub-branches, they've found about 16. And I'm going to show you those today in this video. So there's roughly about 16 actual haplogroups. Now, why is that significant? Well, let me show you. This is pretty cool. Okay, and so this is what one of the things that I've gotten from this particular article. Okay, and so when God gave different languages to different people groups, He divided them according to their paternal ancestry. This is per Genesis 10:32, and of course the next chapter 11:7-8, which is about the Tower of Babel, that led to specific Y-chromosome lineages in different geographical locations. The mitochondrial lines are spread among the different people groups. This is probably, okay, and this is more like, the mitochondrial is more like your mother's genes that you have. Okay, this is probably mainly due to that males and females were freely intermixing prior to the dispersion from Babel, the Tower of Babel. Okay, does that make sense? Studies of the DNA in the Y chromosome, that's the one from your father, can reveal information on the paternal relationship of different people groups. It is not straightforward since people groups have migrated, cultures have gone extinct, languages have changed, separate cultures have merged, etc. So the haplogroups, these are what labels have been given to these different Y chromosome markers in your DNA. Okay, so they're labeled by these letters, which they tried to make sense of it, and from what I've gathered so far, when they originally labeled these, they just made some assumptions, and so you can't derive too much from the letters. The letters, just like somebody said, okay, we see this in this group, let's just call it A, and then we'll call this one B, and we'll call this one C. So don't read anything into that. It doesn't mean that A is like the one from Noah, and B is from Shem, or you can't do that. It's much more complicated than that, from what I gather. And this particular research shows a pretty compelling argument. And then Dr. Jeanson, in his book, actually, I think, takes it even further and makes it even more clear. But so what this is doing is it's kind of a theory. Okay, and let me just read a little bit more so you can get a little flavor of this. Okay, so here it is. The Y chromosome consortium, right here. The Y chromosome consortium, YCC, has assigned alphanumeric labels to the haplogroups, which can be presented graphically in the form of a haplogroup tree. Since the original Y chromosome DNA in Noah is not known, the starting point in the haplogroup tree can be at any point. It does not have to begin in haplogroup A, as usually is assumed when drawing the haplogroup tree. So again, he's suggesting here that A does not mean Noah. Even though there was a reason why they labeled AA, it doesn't follow that is definitely the conclusion. Okay, the numbers of SNPs, and this is single, I think he defines it up here. Okay, so the SNP is right here, a single nucleotide polymorphism, okay, which is a variation of the nucleotide allele at a certain nucleotide position in the human genome. So this is kind of like marking the errors in our DNA from father to son. And so this is something that Dr. Jensen's book really explores in great depth. And so when you see that, the number of SNPs, like the number of single nucleotide polymorphisms between two adjacent haplogroups, differ from 1 to more than 20. When there are several SNPs, it indicates that all variations have occurred in a single individual, or that all lineages that do not have all SNPs have gone extinct. All existing haplogroups are not found or defined yet, and I would question that. That's not necessarily true. And all SNPs defining existing haplogroups are not found either. There is also a possibility of the same SNPs occurring in different individuals in different lineages. Okay, so a lot of technical stuff that you could get into if you want to research it, but he kind of showed this relationship, that how many separations, how many degrees of separation there are between these particular haplogroup labels. And that's what these numbers and letters are representing. So the letters are the haplogroups, and the numbers are the degrees of separation between this and this, like how many generations you might go back to find a common ancestry between these different labels. Okay? So, and here he's suggesting that R1 is Indo-European. Dr. Jensen actually shows that R1 is Semitic, not Japetic. Okay, so there's differences of opinion on that based on, you know, the migration research and the geographic research and the DNA research that's been done, and tried to be overlapped with each other to come to a full puzzle-solving conclusion, which has not fully happened yet, but people are still researching it. And so really, really fascinating stuff. But what I wanted to show was a couple of things. So this is another really good article. I reached out to this individual in email. He didn't get back to me yet. But I looked at a lot of his research on this as well from this particular article, and which is titled "The Genesis 10 Table of Nations and Y-Chromosome DNA." And so pretty fascinating stuff. And again, I would highly recommend reading this article, reading this article from Leif A. Bostrom, and looking at his research and how he breaks everything down. And then all of this was done like a decade ago or so, or more. And then this is, I would say, the latest. So I would look at this next and kind of put them all together. And then you can overlap it with history. So Josephus, the great historian who wrote the Antiquities of the Jews, he wrote commentary on Genesis 10. And so here he tells us, Josephus, and he's 2,000 years before us, and so back at that time, 2,000 years ago, they still kind of knew, like, okay, this people group it's these people who settled in this area geographically, and this people group is the ones who are this nation, and this people group is the ones who are this nation. So Josephus really was our primary source for knowing which nation, which name went with which nation, etc. And so fascinating stuff. But now if you put all three together and you go with the historians and now with the DNA research, you can really start to narrow some things down, and it's pretty cool. Okay, so now they were the grandchildren of Noah, in honor of whose names were imposed on the nations by those that first seized upon them. Japheth, the son of Noah, had 7 sons. They inhabited so that beginning at the mountain Taurus and Amanus. Now, the Taurus and Amanus mountains, they proceeded along Asia as far as the river Tanais, along Europe to Cadiz. You can go look up all these geographical locations, ancient geographical locations, in setting themselves in the land which they light upon, which none had inhabited before. They called the nations by their own names, for Gomer founded those whom the Greeks now call Galatians. So, we recognize that as the letter to the Galatians from Paul. These were the Gauls, but they were called Gomerites in the past. Magog founded those that were from him were Magagites, but who were called by the Greeks Scythians. So essentially, many of the groups that populate Russia. So Magog is Russia. Now, as to Javan, everybody knows whose that is. That Javan is Greece, okay, and the Madai is the Medes. So Madai came from the Medians, who were called Medes by the Greeks, but from Javan, Ionia, and all the Grecians are derived. And so we know, like, when you see these names, we know for sure Javan is the Greeks from Japheth. Thobel founded Thobelites, who are now called Iberis, and Socheni were founded by Mosok, and they are Cappadocians. There's also the mark of the ancient denomination still to be shown, etc., etc. It just goes on with all these. You can come look at this, just search on Josephus Table of Nations, and you'll find this. It's on a bunch of different websites. I just happened to pick this one. But you can find this exact same text on several different websites. You can also actually just get your own copy of Antiquities of the Jews, and you can read it yourself. But this is what Josephus actually wrote. And so it tells you which nations all of those sons of Japheth populated. Then it goes on to Ham, and it says, the children of Ham possessed the land from Syria and Amanus and the mountains of Libanus, seizing upon all that was on its seacoasts and as far as the ocean, and keeping it as their own. Some indeed of its names are utterly vanished away, others of them changed, and another sound given them are hardly to be discovered. Yet a few there are which have kept their denominations entire. For the four sons of Ham, time has not at all heard the name of Cush. For the Ethiopians, over whom he reigned, are even at this day, both by themselves and by all men in Asia, called Cushites. The memory of the Mesraites is preserved in their name, for all who inhabit the country of Judea call Egypt Metzer, and in the Bible it's called Mitzrayim, and that's Upper and Lower Egypt, and the Egyptians Mestrians. Put also was the founder of Libya, and called the inhabitants Putites from himself. There's also a river in the country of the Moors, which bears that name. And so it goes on, so you can see, that yes, it is true that Ham is the father of the sons who essentially populate Africa. However, that doesn't mean that if you have African descent, that you are necessarily from Ham. Because like me, it might mean that you have on your mother's side descended from Ham, or one of Ham's sons, but it doesn't necessarily mean your father was from Ham. It could mean that, but not necessarily. So there's evidence, a lot of evidence, DNA evidence, that many African descent are actually from Shem also. And so the intermixing before the separation into Babylon, so really it is kind of more complicated than just saying, oh, I'm from Ham, or I'm African, so I'm Ham. I'm European, so I'm Japheth. Or I'm Middle Eastern, so I'm Shem. It's actually not as simple as that. It's actually a lot more complicated, and he does a lot of cool stuff to show that. And so then it goes on to do Shem, of course, and this is where the land began at Euphrates and reached the Indian Ocean. For Elam left behind him the Elamites, that's the Persians, Asher, the Assyrians, and then of course you can go on Arpachshadites, who are now called Chaldeans, Aram, the Aramites, which are the Syrians, and the Laudites, which are now called Lydians, and Aram, Uz founded Trachonitis in Damascus. And so you can go through all this. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'm just showing you here pretty amazing stuff that you can go from history, and you can find out what pretty much each one of these is. And so again, here, another Josephus Table of Nations. But what I wanted to show, because I'm already going kind of long on this particular video, it's just so much information, but I wanted to show a couple of things here from a Bible teaching perspective. And so when you look at this, I want to go back one chapter. And if you recall, when we did our last session in Genesis 9, he said this in 9:26. He also said, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem, and let Canaan be his servant. May God enlarge Japheth," and notice this, "and let him dwell in the tents of Shem." Well, that's interesting, because I'm picking up a little more than just a physical dwelling place here, like them dwelling geographically together. I'm also picking up the fact that maybe what is implied here is a little bit deeper than that, meaning that if you think about our earlier lessons from Genesis, where God Banah, he created Banah, Yatsar for Adam, but when he formed Eve, it says he Banah, which means to build a house, or like a tent. And what do you say when you build a house, like building the house of Israel, or the house of Jacob? Well, when you're saying that, when you're going to build a house, well, in order to build a house, in other words, a descendancy or a lineage, you need to have a wife. And so I think that this could be a hint here that it says, "Let him dwell in the tents of Shem," meaning, in other words, from Shem is going to come some of the wives, not all of them, but some of the wives of Shem were going to be given to Japheth, in other words, and possibly vice versa, which is why you would say, well, if you look back and you look at certain of the haplogroups, and you know the ones that are for sure from Shem, then if you have a Shem haplogroup, but you are, for instance, Indo-European, that means that, perhaps on your mother's side, you're from Japheth, but on your father's side, you're from Shem. Or likewise, for African descent, from Ham. It could be that, on your mother's side, you have a Hamite descendancy, but on your father's side, you have a Shemite descendancy, or a Japhetic descendancy. So, really fascinating. Likewise, the other way around. Another interesting thing that he shows in the book about, he has a whole section in here on, skin tone and light skin versus dark skin, and the genetic code of that, and how within a matter of just a handful of generations, like about 7 generations, a child can go from being a particular paternal descendancy or maternal descendancy, can have somebody go from being extremely dark skinned to being extremely light skinned, or extremely light skinned to extremely dark skinned. So it's amazing to see that depending on the intermarrying of and which strand of DNA you're getting from your mother and your father, you could actually go from one to the other, one end of the spectrum to the other, in as few as 7 generations. And that's pretty remarkable. And so if you think about, like, the assumptions we had in the past, I have this skin tone, I must be from this one of Noah's sons. No, not necessarily. You'd be shocked. And so I wanted to show one particular chart in here. I had it marked, so I lost it. So you have to give me just a second here to get it back and find it again. But as I'm looking for it, this particular chart shows something interesting that I want to show for our lesson here that we're going to be looking at regarding the Bible teaching aspect of this. And so give me just a second here to flip through and find this chart again and see it. And I'm going to share it with you. I assume I'm giving him full credit here, so I assume Dr. Jensen won't have a problem with me showing one page out of his book here. Of course, when I'm making the video, now can't find it. So unpreparedness. Here it is. I found it. Okay, so I'm going to switch back to full screen mode here for a second so you can see this. But I want to kind of show you this. Okay, and so he is assuming that what you see there in the blue is Shem, and what you see there in the green is from Japheth, and what you see there in the magenta is Ham. Now, what you'll see, which is very interesting, because here I wanted to count this up with you, you'll see, like, for instance, R1A and R1B and R2, etc., and Q. However, if you go back far enough, and he shows this in all of his charts, if you go back far enough, you can see that all of that came from actually one common ancestor, beyond Shem. And so, really, if you match all those up, R1A, R1B, R2, and Q, they all actually have one common ancestor, which is branched out to 4 now. And then you have S, K, and M. This is kind of like the Indonesian peoples, and from Papua New Guinea and Indonesia, and you know that East Pacific area. And then you know, you have N and O, and then T and I. T is thought to be the Jews specifically. And then, you know, here's some of the ones that come from Japheth, and then H and G, and so on and so forth. And like E would be definite African descent from Ham, and you see all those variations: E, 1, B, 1B, E, 1B, 1A. And so these are just you know, variations of different African descent. But what I wanted to kind of look at here is counting them up. If we consolidate R1A, R1B, R2, and Q into one, if we say, well, they all share a common ancestor at a certain point after Noah. I'm not saying Noah, of course we all share Noah, but after Noah, they all share a common ancestor. So that's 1. S, K, and M all share a common ancestor, so that's 2. N, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. And so notice that if you look at it that way, and that's something that I haven't seen really anybody do, is if you count that up like that and look at 16, well, let me show you something very interesting. Okay, so let's go back now to Genesis 10, and notice there's 70 names. However, originally there's actually only 16 fathers. So let's look at this. After Shem, Ham, and Japheth, right? The sons of Japheth were Gomer, and Magog, and Madai, and Javan, and Tubal, and Meshech, and Tiras. That is 7. There's 7. Okay? Now, the sons of Gomer were Ashkenaz, Rephaim, and Togarmah, but those are grandchildren of Japheth. Those aren't Japheth's sons, they're his grandsons. So the only ones who are actual sons, direct sons, are Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Meshech, and Tiras. So this is kind of like the people who led to the modern day Germans and some of the Anatolian people from Turkey. You know, it's more than just Germany, but Germany is one of the descendants of Gomer. Magog is definitely Russia. Madai is definitely the Medes. Javan is definitely the Greeks. And then you could have a little bit of debate about these other 3, but you know, it's not just as simple as that. But anyway, let's just count up the number. That's 7. Okay? So I'm going to skip this and this because these are grandsons. Okay? Now, if we go to Ham now, who were Ham's direct sons? Cush, Mitzrayim, Put, and Canaan. That's 4. So Ham has 4 sons. Now it tells us who Ham's grandsons were, because Cush, Cush is one of his sons, and then Cush has his own children, Seba, Havilah, etc. Right? But Ham only has 4 direct sons. Now, if you go on and you look now at Shem, and let's find out. Oh, there it is. Okay, and if you look at Shem, the sons of Shem were Elam, Asher, Arpachshad, Lud, and Aram. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you had 7 plus 4 is 11, plus 5 is 16. So there's actually only 16 direct sons. All the rest of them are grandsons and great-grandsons. Okay, so you have sons, grandsons, and great-grandsons in this table of the total 70. However, you only have 16 actual sons. And if you go count that chart that I just showed you, after Noah, we're not talking about Noah, we're talking about after Noah, some of those groups can be consolidated into a single father because they sub-branched out after that. But they can be consolidated back to a single father. And if you look at that, you'll see that there's the ones that do that, there's actually, you could say that if you consolidate those sub-branches into one, you could make an argument, and again, I'm not an expert at this, but just from what I'm seeing, the pattern that I'm seeing, you could make an argument that says there's really only 16 haplogroups, which is very interesting because there's only 16 names that are listed here in Genesis 10. And so I don't know if that's something to be looking into, but I think it's significant. I think that the fact that you can do that, that you can collapse R, for instance, into one haplogroup, if you go back far enough, and then and you look at, for example, you look at Q, which is the Native Americans, and he does an amazing stuff. I actually emailed back and forth with Dr. Jeanson about a year or two ago when he was doing some videos about the Native Americans that I was fascinated by, and I emailed him back and forth. He was very gracious, and he responded to my questions, and he's a good guy. And as I discussed some of the things that his findings with him, and shared with him a few things that I had seen. He came to discover that the Native Americans, Q, is also from Shem and closely related to R. And so I found, if you go back from Q and R and consolidate those into a single descendant of Shem, one of these children of Shem, then that's pretty intriguing. That's pretty intriguing. That's to me a possibility, that another way of looking at these patterns. So I think that's pretty cool. And let me just show one other thing to make this relevant to our day. So I want to point this out because this is something I think the Lord revealed to me when I was preparing for this, because I never looked at it like this. Okay, so I want to go back to this Shemite descendancy, also to Shem, the father of all the children of Eber, and the brother of Japheth the elder, children were born. The sons of Shem were Elam, again, that is for sure Persia. That's the patriarch of Persia, Elam. Asher, that's the patriarch of Assyria. Arpachshad, and Lud, and Aram. Aram is the patriarch of Syria. Not Assyria, Syria. Okay, and the sons of Aram, Uz, Hol, Gether, and Mash. Arpachshad begot the father of Shelah, and Shelah begot Eber. This is the patriarch of the Hebrews. However, it's split. Okay, look at this. 2 sons were born to Eber. The name of the one was Peleg, for in his days the earth was divided. Now, this is really fascinating because if you go to barrysetterfield.org and go to Genesis Science Research, Barry Setterfield's YouTube page, he actually does a whole thing on Peleg and how there was a catastrophe after the flood regarding Peleg, the days the earth was divided and it was split. And this is when he shows scientific evidence and proof of the continental drift and the shifting of the continents into the positions that we more or less see them as today. That all happened and started happening and mostly happened during the days of Peleg when the earth was divided. However, here's the spiritual application, and it applies to us today. Okay, so because who is Peleg? Well, Peleg is the patriarch that is connected to the lineage when we go forward to Genesis chapter 11. Remember this Peleg, right? So he has 2 sons, Peleg, for in his days the earth was divided, and his brother's name was Joktan. But Peleg is the one that leads to here's the descendants of Shem. Shem was 100 years old and became the father of Arpachshad 2 years after the flood. And Shem lived 500 years and he begot Arpachshad. Arpachshad lived 35 years, begot Shelah. Arpachshad lived 400 years and 3 years and became the father of Shelah. Shelah lived 30 years and became the father of Eber. And Shelah lived 403 years after he begot Eber. And then Eber lived 34 years and begot Peleg. Now, we know from Genesis 10 that he also begot Joktan, and there's a whole other genealogy there. But Peleg's the important one. This is the one who, in his days, the earth was divided, the continental drift, and the nations separating out over the whole earth, right? But the interesting thing here is that if you carry on now with Peleg's descendancy, you'll see Peleg to Ru, and Ru to Serug, and Serug to Nahor, Nahor to Terah, and Terah to Abram, which is Abraham, who God uses to raise up Isaac, and then Jacob, who becomes Israel. So, who is the descendant who is going, or the ancestor that is going to bring forth the Jewish people? Well, it's none other than Peleg, right here. Okay, so it's not Joktan, it's Peleg. That's who it is. He's the one, and the whole earth was divided during his days. Now, why is that significant? Well, if you look at it from a prophetic perspective, what today is the earth, the whole earth, all the nations of the earth, America included, what is the whole earth divided over? What is the issue the whole earth is divided over? Well, the whole earth is divided over Israel. And so in Peleg, in his days, the earth was divided. Well, now, the descendant of Peleg, Israel, and that nation, the whole earth is divided over the nation of Israel and what's to be done with everything that's going on over there. Because of all of the wars and the battle over Jerusalem and the Temple Mount and all that's going on over there. It's prophetic, but it's prophetic all the way back here to Genesis 10, because the earth is divided over this same thing, the same issue, this descendancy that God used to bring forth the Messiah, Jesus Christ, and this people that have been partially blinded, as it says, Paul teaches us in Romans 10, because of their rejection of their Messiah, but they will be grafted in again, and all Israel, true Israel, will be saved. And that is coming up, of course, during the tribulation period. And it says, for instance, in Zechariah, all those who try to, this Jerusalem will be a burdensome stone, and all who try to lift it will be crushed. The scripture also says, those who divide my land, I will cut them asunder. I will divide them. In other words, those people who are trying to make a two-state solution, they're the ones who are going to be turned into, they're the ones that are going to get cut up, not Israel. Israel's not going to be cut up. They are. And so those who try to divide Israel and parse up the land and give a two-state solution, no, they're going to be undone. And so, this whole issue of the earth being divided at Peleg, well, that's bearing out now in our current time because the whole earth is divided over the descendancy of Peleg, who is, of course, the nation of Israel. And all earth is fighting over it right now. So, anyway, there's just so much to this. I could go on for hours. And I'll try to do another couple of videos on Genesis 10. If the Lord leads, we'll see. But I hope you've enjoyed this particular video and this session, and I hope you get the book or a digital version of it, and or you can just watch. He has a whole bunch of stuff public on YouTube and Answers in Genesis. Fascinating stuff. If you are brave enough to get your Y-chromosome DNA checked, you can go look it up in the chart and see which son of Noah, and in many cases you can actually track it all more specifically to a particular son of either Shem, Ham, or Japheth, and see which descendancy you are likely attached to. And I was shocked, and one of the cool things about these charts is I'll just show you R as an example. It also, he proves, the other amazing thing about this is he absolutely proves that based on the error copying rates of DNA from father to son, that there is absolutely no possible way you could have anything other than 6,000 years of creation, strictly based off the DNA that we see from all the people who are alive today. So you can go back and you can look and you can see it, and it's very, very clear that you absolutely cannot have 200,000 years of humans evolving, from apes and all that utterly ridiculous nonsense. Absolute garbage. Okay, so you absolutely can prove that beyond any doubt, and he gives all the data and the reasoning for that. But the thing that I wanted to show you that is really, really cool is he shows the migration maps and all of these descendancies of these different haplogroups. And I can't find the one I wanted to show you, but I'll just show you like a couple examples. So you can kind of see the map of the world there, and he shows that particular haplogroup, and then you could see where, by the size of the circle, that intensity of where that haplogroup is, and at what era it was at different points. And so you can go look at that, and it'll show you the dates, and it'll show you, and then there's a whole bunch of history in the book where it shows migration patterns, known historical migration patterns from different groups based on natural disasters, wars, and other things, and just cultural shifts of things that happened that we know happened in history. Unbelievably fascinating stuff. You can just get lost in it, but I'm here to teach Genesis, so I don't want to go too far into this one specific thing. So I don't know what I'll do next. I'll see what the Lord leads. We might just go ahead and skip on to Genesis 11 from this point, Tower of Babel. I don't know. Let me see. And we are traveling, so I'm not going to be able to make a video next week or the week after, but I will be posting some on-location videos, Lord willing, from our travels. And so I hope you enjoy those in lieu of our Genesis series until we get back. And then once we're back, I will see how the Lord leads us to continue on in Genesis, either a part 2 of our Genesis 10, 1 through 32, or I might just leave it like that and go on to Genesis 11, because you know, some of these things some people are interested in, like I am, but other people, um, they don't want to get into all this technical stuff too much. So we'll see. I'm interested to hear your feedback, and check it out. It's kind of cool to see um, your heritage directly linked back to specific people in the Bible. I think that's pretty neat. And so anyway, I hope this blessed you and edified you. I hope you're enjoying this series. As always, I'm enjoying putting it together for you. And we will see you here, there, in the air, or in the next video. God bless you.